A stratified model of art history, from cave walls to quantum states. Chapter 2. The canvas and oil layer, mobility and autonomy. The cave layer gave us something remarkable, an image that could outlast the person who made it. But that image was locked in place. It belonged to one cave, in one landscape, in one part of the world. If you wanted to see it, you had to go there. The next great shift in art history was about freedom. What if an image didn't have to stay where it was made? What if it could be carried, shipped, bought, sold, and hung on a wall anywhere in the world? This is what the canvas and oil layer made possible. And like most big changes, it didn't happen all at once. It was the result of a slow, centuries-long negotiation between materials, beliefs, and the practical demands of a changing world. 3 steps away from the wall. The journey from cave wall to stretched canvas moved through 3 distinct stages, and each one tells us something important about how materials and ideas change together. Step 1. Fresco. For centuries, the dominant form of wall painting in Europe was fresco, a technique in which pigment mixed with water is applied directly to wet plaster. As the plaster dries, the pigment becomes part of the wall itself. The result is durable and beautiful, but it is completely inseparable from its location. A fresco is not a painting on a wall. It is the wall. You cannot move it any more than you can move a building. Step 2. The painted wooden panel. In the Byzantine tradition and throughout medieval Europe, sacred images were painted on wooden panels using a technique called egg tempera, pigment mixed with egg yolk. These panels were portable, at least in theory, but in practice they were almost always built into altarpieces, the large elaborate frames that stood at the front of churches. They could be moved, but they were rarely meant to be. The image still belonged to a specific sacred space. Step 3. Oil paint on stretched canvas. This is the combination that changed everything. A piece of linen cloth stretched over a wooden frame and sealed with a primer became a lightweight, durable, and fully independent surface. Oil paint, pigment mixed with linseed oil or walnut oil, dried slowly, allowing colors to be blended and layered in ways that egg tempera never could. The result was a painting that could be rolled up, packed into a crate, loaded onto a ship, and sent anywhere in the world. The image had finally left the building. Why egg tempera looked the way it did. To understand why oil paint was such a revolution, it helps to understand what egg tempera was trying to do and why it had limits. Egg tempera dries very quickly. This means a painter has to work fast and cannot easily blend colors on the surface. Instead, painters built up tone and shadow through a technique called hatching, laying down tiny, careful strokes side by side, like a very fine drawing. The result is precise and controlled, but it cannot easily capture the soft, gradual way that light falls across a human face, or the way skin seems to glow from within. But here is the fascinating thing. That limitation was not entirely wanted. When medieval and Byzantine painters depicted holy figures, the Virgin Mary, Christ, the saints, they were not trying to make them look like real people. They were trying to reveal something beyond ordinary human appearance. The slightly flat, non-realistic quality of tempera painting was not a failure of technique, it was a theological choice. The image was not meant to look like a person, it was meant to look like a vision. The absence of visible brushwork, the smooth, almost inhuman surface of a well-executed tempera icon was part of the point. It suppressed the trace of the human hand and gave the image an authority that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the individual artist.
What oil paint made possible? Oil paint changed the game completely, and it did so by solving a very specific problem. How do you paint skin? Human skin is not a flat, uniform color. It is translucent in some places and opaque in others. It catches light differently depending on the angle. It has warmth and depth and life. Egg tempera, with its quick-drying, hatching-based technique, could suggest these qualities but never quite capture them. Oil paint, because it dries slowly and can be layered in thin, transparent glazes, could do something close to magic. It could make painted skin look like it had light moving through it. This technical breakthrough had enormous consequences. Portraiture, the art of capturing an individual human face and personality, flourished as never before. A painter like Rembrandt or Vermeer could now show not just what a person looked like, but something of what it felt like to be in the same room with them, the particular way the light caught their eyes, the texture of their skin, the sense of a specific living person rather than a symbolic type. The shift from egg tempera to oil paint was, in this sense, also a shift in what art was for, from revealing divine essence to capturing human individuality, from theological presence to personal identity. The painting as an object in the world. Once a painting could be rolled up and shipped, it became something new, a commodity, not in a negative sense, but in a practical one. It could be bought and sold. It could be commissioned by a merchant in Amsterdam and shipped to a buyer in Lisbon. It could accumulate a history, a record of who had owned it and where it had been, what art historians call its provenance. But to understand how this happened, it helps to ask a simple question: where did the canvas itself come from? The answer connects painting directly to one of the biggest events in world history, the Age of Discovery. From the 15th century onward, European ships were venturing further and further across the oceans, to the Americas, to Africa, to Asia. These voyages required sails, and those sails were made of exactly the kind of heavy, tightly woven linen cloth that, when stretched over a wooden frame and primed with a white ground, makes an excellent painting surface. Canvas, the word itself comes from cannabis, the plant whose fibers were used to make rope and rough cloth, was the strongest and largest woven fabric available at the time. Shipyards kept it in enormous supply. It was cheap, durable, and came in widths that no other material could match. When painters began looking for a surface that could support larger and larger works as the ambitions of patrons and artists alike were growing, canvas was right there, waiting. It was the material of the age, literally woven into the infrastructure of global exploration. This is a perfect example of what the stratified model means when it says that art and its historical moment are always in conversation. Artists did not invent canvas out of nowhere. They found it in their world, in the shipyards and the warehouses and the rigging of the ships that were reshaping the entire known world, and they recognized that it could serve their purposes. The material of maritime expansion became the material of artistic ambition. The same cloth that caught the wind on the Atlantic crossed into the studio and changed the history of painting. And the consequences were significant. Larger canvases meant larger paintings. Larger paintings meant more ambitious subjects, grand historical scenes, monumental portraits, vast landscapes. The size of the support helped determine the scale of the art. Once again, material conditions and artistic expression moved together, each shaping the other. This was connected to a much larger change in European society. A new merchant class emerged with money to spend and walls to fill. The church was no longer the only patron of art. Secular subjects, portraits, landscapes, scenes of everyday life, became not just acceptable but fashionable. The painting as a movable, ownable object found its natural home in this new world of trade, wealth, and private ambition. Old layers do not disappear. It is important to say clearly, fresco did not die when canvas arrived. Tempera panels did not vanish when oil paint became standard. Throughout the Renaissance, great painters continued to work in fresco. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, painted by Michelangelo in the early 16th century, is perhaps the most famous example. Tempera continued to be used alongside oil for many decades, and some painters combined the two techniques, using tempera for the initial layers and oil glazes for the final surface. This is exactly what the stratified model predicts. New layers add new possibilities. They do not erase what came before. Each technique survived because it had qualities the others could not match. Fresco had a monumental scale and permanence that suited the decoration of large public buildings. Tempera had a precision and a clarity of line that some artists continued to prefer. Oil had a richness and flexibility that made it the dominant medium for the next 4 centuries, and it remains widely used today. The wall persists beneath the canvas. The canvas persists beneath the photograph. The layers accumulate. What this layer really changed, at its deepest level, the canvas and oil layer changed something fundamental about what a painting is. In the cave, an image was inseparable from its place. It was part of the rock, part of the landscape, part of a specific experience of darkness and torchlight. With oil on canvas, an image became an object, something that could exist independently of any particular place, that could travel and be owned and change hands. This is so familiar to us now that it is hard to imagine it ever being otherwise, but it was a genuine revolution, and it made possible everything we now think of as the art market, the museum, the private collection, and the idea of a painting as a possession. The image had learned to move. That freedom, once gained, was never lost.